What is up, Bears fans? Welcome to your Chicago Bears Huddle. I'm W. James. This is your UK take on all things Chicago Bears. Look, we're going to talk about Caleb Williams. I don't know about you, but look, I love a good conspiracy theory. You know what? Roswell, I was there. Aliens, I'm there. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, yeah, got it, man. JFK, love a good conspiracy theory. But look, this whole conspiracy theory, the whole agenda against Caleb. Is there an agenda against Caleb? Look, whatever it is with Caleb Williams, there seems to be within the national media and within even some within the Bears fan base an agenda against Caleb Williams. If he doesn't come out and throw like Joe Montana, run like Lamar Jackson, and command his offense like Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady, then suddenly he is a disaster. He is not the man for the Bears, and Coach Johnson doesn't want him anymore. You know, it just gets my goat. It really, really does get my goat when it comes to the situation with Caleb. He has one bad game where he doesn't play as well as perhaps he has in previous games. The Saints game, he was not great. Yeah, the stat line, obviously under 200 yards passing, the interception, no TD passes. So look, it wasn't the best of games. Yes, there were throws that weren't great. There were, throws that he missed, reads that he missed, progressions that there was all sorts of things there. And Ben Johnson acknowledges that, and we'll talk about what Coach Johnson had to say in a minute. But, there's certain people within the fan base that are still saying that he's a bust, that are still saying that they'd rather have Tyson Bagent as QB1. Well, guys, Tyson ain't a QB1, he's a QB2. And there's those in the national media that are kind of sort of, railing against him to one of another one. I was watching a program the other day, NFL Network, and it was, I can't remember, or was it? I can't remember, it was something else, actually, Stephen A. Smith talking about him. Stephen A. Smith was very supportive of Caleb. There was another guy on that program, Mad Dog, I think the guy's name was. I can't remember his full name off the top of my head. He was, talking about Caleb and Caleb not being, a good enough quarterback for the Bears. And I just sat there and thought, man, you don't know what you're talking about. Now Tyler Dunn of the Go Long has been talking as well and saying that, that maybe Ben Johnson hasn't got any long-term commitment to Caleb Williams. Now, look, we know that the relationship between a QB and his head coach is absolutely vital. Obviously Bill Belichick, Tom Brady, for instance, had a fantastic relationship. Joe Montana did with George Seifert and with Bill Walsh, as did Steve Young as well. Patrick Mahomes has an excellent relationship with Andy Reid. Jalen Hurts does with Nick Sirianni. So, that relationship is always important. Now, going back in Bears history, Jim McMahon and Mike Ditka weren't always on the same kind of simpatico. They weren't always great with each other, but they were civil and they got on and they were usually on the same page. Matt Nagy and Mitch Trubisky, 2018, all good. And then when things fell apart, the Bears fell apart. It's kind of been hoped that Ben Johnson can form a very effective relationship with Caleb Williams and move forward. And I think, look, Ben has faith in Caleb. Caleb is Ben's boy. That's the way it is. Ben Johnson spoke, didn't he, about why he took the Bears job, and he took the Bears job because he wanted to work with Caleb. That's what he said. Things aren't going as bad as some people make them out to be. Caleb has a 3-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio, 9 TDs to 3 interceptions. He's got a 92.1 passer rating. He also has 2 fourth quarter comebacks where he's led the team back, which is, a characterful thing that he does. His stat line is good. And we'll look at the stats in a bit more detail in a moment. But people are obviously raising questions about whether it is good enough for Coach Johnson. His completion percentage is 61.1%, which is obviously, not great, and is something that he does need to continue to work on. And look, I think a lot is forgotten that Caleb is 23 games into an NFL career. We're not talking about a 5-year veteran. We're not talking about Patrick Mahomes. We're not talking about Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen. We're talking about a guy who's played 23 games. Now, it's also worth remembering that some of those games are under Matt Eberflus and Shane Waldron, where there was more damage done than good. So for me, you've got to look at this situation, and you look at the situation between Caleb and between Ben, and I think those people are just trying to make trouble. There is an almost desire to see him, because he's number one pick, fail. This is what Tyler Dunn said. He said, the very next split second, the conversation shifted to the union of head coach and quarterback. Could Johnson resurrect the pick? Time will tell if Williams is Johnson's guy at the position. That vetting process is still ongoing. Chicago's 4-game winning streak, however, is foolproof. The coach was always more of a mad scientist. There will be no contorting, no twisting the plan of attack. Williams must keep pace with Johnson. Look, I don't think there's any doubt that Caleb Williams is on the same page as Ben Johnson, that he listens to Ben Johnson, that he's learning from Ben Johnson, that he's getting better. You know, guys, you've got to remember, like I said, this guy had 17 games last season where he had to work under some pretty trying, situation. Eberflus was sacked. Shane Waldron was got rid of. You know, the changes were incredible. You know, this guy's on his third head coach. He's gone through a lot, and he's still learning the game. And I think, you know, people saying throw him away, he's no good, which seems to be the agenda from some in the media and some in our own fan base, which I think is disgusting, is just ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. Now, on reflection with the game on Sunday, Ben Johnson said this. He says, I feel like there's a few of those we could have had back, maybe make a little bit of a different decision than we did in that moment's notice. Obviously talking about some of the mistakes that Caleb made, some of the reads he missed, some of the throws that he missed, the interception. But like I said, he's still learning the game, and that's something that Ben has acknowledged. He's still learning the playbook. He's still learning the Ben Johnson system. And, you know, he ain't Patrick Mahomes. He ain't Jalen Hurts. He ain't Josh Allen. He ain't Joe Burrow. You know, he's still learning. He's still getting there. And I think Ben obviously realizes that. And yeah, look, there are mistakes that Caleb made, and it wasn't the best game on Sunday. I think, was it 3 of 8? He only completed 3 of 8 passes in the pocket on Sunday, which wasn't great. But there we go. You know, this is what Ben Johnson then went on to say. That's what part of makes him a special player. You don't want to new to him. You don't. That's dangerous road to go down, because he's got natural ability to feel the pocket and know when to escape and extend. I think more than anything for us, it's just making sure we're on the same page of the time and the place, the situation for where that Superman cape comes out. So obviously, you know, a little bit of reflection here from Ben that, you know, Caleb is excellent, obviously extending play. His escapability is there to be seen. He's excellent at escaping when he's under pressure. I think sometimes, obviously, you know, he makes some bad decisions there. We know that. But as Ben says, it's about him and Caleb working on the same page and working off the same page to make sure that, you know, that Caleb knows when to sit and throw, and when he knows when to run and when to get out of there. And that's work that's continually ongoing between the coach and his quarterback. You know, like I said, I think there's a lot of people who are railing against Caleb and want to see Caleb fail. But Caleb ain't going anywhere. Caleb is the quarterback. He's Ben's man, and he will make progress, and he will continue to make progress. And progress is not a linear prospect in the NFL. You don't see people go, you know, start off well and get better and better and better. There are blips along the road when they're learning, especially at such a position as quarterback. And Ben and Caleb are learning together, and Caleb is still developing and getting better. You know, like I said, you look at Caleb's stats, this kid's only played 23 games in the NFL. It's not like he is coming from a, you know, massively huge amount of experience. And I think there's a lot of rubbish talked about Caleb Williams, an awful lot of rubbish talked about Caleb. Like I said, this is a 23-game quarterback who is still learning and had an awful season last season. You know, well, actually, he had a decent season last season, but didn't have good conditions because of what he was working under. Last season, 17 games, 351 completions from 562 attempts, a 62.5% completion percentage. So you can see there's been a bit of a fall off in terms of his completion percentage. But, you know, look, we're only 6 games into this season. That can get better, hopefully. 3,500 yards last season, 6.3 average, 20 TDs, 6 interceptions, 47 long, 68 sacks. Obviously, he was still running for his life last season under a lot of pressure. This season, 6 games played, 113 completions of 185 attempts, 61.1% completion percentage, over 1,000 yards passing, averaging 7.3, so averaging a yard further already, 5 TDs, 3 interceptions, 65 long, and 11 sacks. Sacks have been better. He's holding on to the ball for less time this season. So that is something that is improving with Caleb. But like I said, I don't think that this current narrative that is going round is fair on Caleb. He is making progress. He is the Bears QB1. He is the future of this franchise. So that, you know what? We need to shut out the outside noise as Bears fans. Ignore the media bias against him. And let's get behind our boy, Caleb. Guys, let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. And I will catch you on our next video. Remember always, bear down.